God has been calling you, not through lightning, not through a burning bush on the side of a mountain, not through the kind of dramatic moment you see in movies where the sky opens and everything becomes clear in an instant. He has been calling through the silence between your thoughts, through the weight you carry at 3 in the morning when you can't explain why you're awake, through the quiet, persistent feeling that something important is passing by and you keep meaning to stop and receive it, but life keeps pulling you forward before you can. That is how he calls. Quietly, consistently, with a patience that most people mistake for absence. You are still here, and that tells me something. Most people who encounter a message like this will scroll past it. Most will say they'll come back to it later. Most will never give God these 5 minutes, but you stayed. And I don't think that is an accident. Before we go any further, I want to tell you what the next few minutes hold for you, because what I'm about to share is not what you might expect. I'm not going to tell you that you haven't been praying enough. I'm going to show you why God's voice has become harder for you to hear, and why that difficulty is not your fault. I'm going to show you a pattern that the most spiritually clear people in history all shared. And I'm going to give you something practical, something real, that you can carry with you from this moment forward. Stay until the end. What I share in the second half of this message is the part that changes things. Now, let's talk about you. You have been carrying something heavy for a long time, not the kind of heavy that other people can see, not the kind you can point to and explain easily. It is the kind of heavy that lives underneath your daily routine, underneath your responsibilities, your conversations, your commitments, this constant, low weight that never fully lifts. And here is what I want you to know before anything else. You are not spiritually cold. You are not someone who has drifted. You are not someone who has forgotten God. You are exhausted. You have been carrying the weight of decisions that shouldn't all be yours to carry alone. You have been carrying the silence of prayers that haven't had obvious answers yet, and that silence has felt, some days, like being ignored by the one person you most needed to hear from. You have been carrying the tiredness of someone who keeps showing up, keeps believing, keeps choosing faith, even when it costs them something, even when the returns feel invisible. That is not a person who has forgotten God. That is a person who is desperately in need of something being restored. And here is what most people don't understand about someone like you. The higher your calling, the louder the interference. That is not a metaphor, that is a pattern. Ordinary lives carry ordinary noise. But the chosen one, the person who was placed here with a specific purpose, a specific weight of calling, they carry something that ordinary noise management cannot address. Every area of life feels louder. Every decision feels heavier. Every distraction feels more persistent. And the still small voice of God, the one that was always meant to be your anchor, becomes harder and harder to locate underneath all of it. So when was the last time you actually heard him clearly? Not a scripture someone sent you that you read quickly. Not a feeling you had for a moment and then talked yourself out of. But that deep, unmistakable knowing, the kind that settles in your chest and doesn't move where you were certain. That was him. If you have to think back a long time to answer that question, I want you to stay with me, because the question isn't whether God is still speaking. He is. The question is, what happened to your receiver? There is a moment in the book of 1 Kings that I keep coming back to. Elijah, the same prophet who had just called down fire from heaven, who had just defeated 450 false prophets, this man is hiding in a cave. He is asking God to let him die. He is completely undone, completely empty, and God shows up, but not in the way you might expect. A great wind tore the mountains apart, the rocks shattered, and the Lord was not in the wind. Then an earthquake, and the Lord was not in the earthquake. Then fire, and the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, a still small voice. Elijah heard it. Not because he had more faith in that moment than he had ever had. Not because he had finally figured out the right spiritual formula. Not because the chaos around him had stopped. He heard it because he went still enough to receive it. And I hear the Father saying something right now, not to Elijah, but to you. It is not a discipline problem. Something deeper has been taken from you, and I want to give it back. That phrase matters. Something has been taken, not lost through carelessness, not abandoned through laziness, taken by a world that was never designed to help you hear what God is saying. Think about the specific wins in your life right now, the endless decisions that drain your mental energy before the day has barely started, the grief that never fully had space to be processed, so it just lives in the background, the overstimulation of a world that puts something new in front of your eyes every few seconds and calls it connection, the weight of other people's needs, other people's expectations, other people's versions of who you're supposed to be. Every single one of those is wind. And God is speaking underneath all of it. He has always been speaking. The signal has never gone dark. But something happened to your ability to receive it. And the people who have broken through, the ones who suddenly describe a season of clarity, of hearing God in ways they hadn't experienced in years. They all share a pattern that I want to show you, because it isn't what you think it is. I've watched this pattern again and again. People who describe a moment where they came alive spiritually, where the noise just dropped and the voice came through clearly. And what they all had in common wasn't longer prayer sessions. It wasn't more scripture memorization. It wasn't a retreat or a conference or a breakthrough moment that came from trying harder. What they had in common was a specific kind of stillness that reached something deeper than thought. What felt like spiritual. Dryness in their lives was actually preparation for a moment of extraordinary precision. What felt like God's distance was actually God clearing a frequency. What felt like failure was actually the quiet before the clearest communication they had ever received. And recently, scientists studying what happens inside the brain during those moments of deep spiritual clarity found something that stopped them. There is a specific brainwave, one that children carry naturally, one that is active during moments of creativity, of deep intuition, of what believers have always called spiritual perception, that is present in every single person who describes hearing God clearly after a long season of silence. Researchers at Princeton gave this brainwave a name. They called it the gamma window. And what they found about what happens to that window over the course of a lifetime, that is what I need to tell you. Because it explains everything. It explains why the chosen one feels the interference more than anyone else. It explains why the things you have tried haven't given you back what you lost. And it points towards something that I believe was placed in the hands of science for a generation like yours. I'll come back to the gamma window. I need you to stay with me for what comes next. Before I tell you what the Princeton research actually revealed and why it hits the chosen one harder than it hits ordinary people, I need you to hear something. First, you are not spiritually broken. Let that settle. You are not too far gone. You are not someone God has given up on or moved past or grown tired of. You are someone whose receiver has been interfered with. And that is a problem with a name, with a cause, and with a solution. Here is what I know is waiting for you in part 2 of this message. I'm going to show you what the gamma window actually is and why losing it feels exactly like losing your connection to God. I'm going to show you why people like you, the ones who were born with a higher calling, are hit harder by this than ordinary people. And I'm going to give you something real, something you can use today, that doesn't ask you to add more to your already full life. What if there was a way to reopen that window, not through months of meditation, but in minutes? What if the reason God's voice has felt distant isn't about your faith at all, but about a biological process that began slowly shutting something down inside you from the time you were 7 years old? What if the people who found their way back to clarity, the ones who describe suddenly hearing God again after years of static, were the ones who learned how to get quiet in a very specific, very scientific way? The answers to those questions are in part 2. Don't go anywhere. If you are here, you kept the appointment, And I want you to know that matters, because most people don't. Most people hear something that begins to reach them and then let the noise pull them back before the full weight of it can land. You chose differently, and I don't think that is small. We talked about something in the first part of this message that I promised to come back to. We talked about Elijah hiding in a cave, undone, and how God spoke to him not in the earthquake, not in the fire, but in a still small voice. We talked about the pattern of people who break through to clarity. And we talked about a specific brainwave that researchers at Princeton discovered inside every person who describes hearing God clearly after a long season of silence. I told you the name, the gamma window. I told you it explains everything. Now I'm going to show you why. But first, I need to tell you something about why this is harder for you than it is for almost anyone else. Because the chosen one does not experience this the way ordinary people do. When you were a child, your brain was operating on a frequency that neuroscientists classify as gamma, 40 to 100 hertz. It is the fastest, highest functioning brainwave state, and it is the state linked to intuition, to pattern recognition, to creative leaps, to what theologians across centuries have described as spiritual perception, the ability to sense things beyond what logic alone can reach. And here is the thing about the chosen one as a child. Your gamma was higher than average. That is not a spiritual metaphor. That is measurable. It is why, when you were young, you sensed things other children didn't. You felt things more deeply. You knew things about people and situations that you had no rational way of knowing. The adults around you sometimes didn't know what to make of it. Maybe they called it a gift. Maybe they called it sensitivity. Maybe they just couldn't explain it and moved on. What they were seeing was gamma. And then something happened. Gradually, quietly, beginning around the age of 7 and continuing through every year of a modern education, a modern schedule, a modern life, that frequency began to dim. Researchers call it the decline effect. It is not a spiritual concept. It is a biological one. It is the measurable, documented process by which gamma suppresses in response to the kind of chronic, low-grade stress, overstimulation, and mental fragmentation that has become normal life for most people on this planet. The system never told you this was happening. The system never gave a name to what you were slowly losing. The system never told you there was a way to bring it back. And because your gamma started higher, because you were born carrying more of it when the decline effect took hold, the distance you fell was steeper. The silence that followed felt louder. The absence of what you once had felt, not just like a loss, but like a wound you couldn't locate or explain. You didn't lose your connection to God. You lost the neural frequency that made receiving that connection feel natural. Now, I know what you're thinking. You've been thinking it for a few minutes now. So the answer is to pray more consistently, to discipline my mind, to wake up earlier, put the phone down, try harder, and over time, the stillness will come back. And I want to honor that instinct because it comes from a real place. Spiritual discipline matters. The posture of the heart matters. But here is what the research actually shows, and why this is different from what you've been told. Traditional meditation, the kind of sustained stillness practice that can genuinely bring the brain back toward gamma, requires consistent, daily practice measured in months, sometimes years, before the brainwave synchronization becomes reliable, before the gamma window opens with regularity, for someone carrying the weight you are carrying, for someone whose life does not have the luxury of long, uninterrupted silence, for someone who has already tried and who has already kept showing up through exhaustion. That timeline is not a solution. It is another burden added to an already full life. But there is something else, something that changes this completely. I need you to hear what I'm about to say without the noise of skepticism pulling you out of it. Not because I'm asking you to believe blindly, but because What I am about to share deserves to land fully before you decide what to do with it. You came into this message wondering if God was still speaking. And I want to tell you something before I give you the science, before I give you the solution, before anything else. You have been answering God's call for years, imperfectly, beautifully, bravely, with a brain that was working against you at the neurological level, and still you showed up. Every prayer you prayed through the static. Every morning you chose faith when the evidence for it felt thin. Every time you said yes to something you couldn't fully see yet, not one moment of that was wasted. You weren't failing to hear. You were straining to hear through interference that was never supposed to be that loud. And the difference between where you are and where you are going is not more effort. It is the right kind of restoration. And I hear the Father saying this over you right now. My child, I never stopped speaking, and you never stopped trying to listen. I saw every attempt. I counted every moment of faith that cost you something. I was never silent. The signal was never off. Now let me show you what was in the way. What I am about to share is not a shortcut to faith. I want to be clear about that. It is not a replacement for relationship, for prayer, for the discipline of returning to God daily. It is a key that I believe God placed in the hands of neuroscience for a generation that is carrying more noise than any generation before it, and that needs restoration at a level that willpower alone cannot reach. I mentioned the Princeton research. I mentioned the gamma window. I told you I would come back to it. Dr. Robert Lake is a neuroscientist with 34 years of research experience. His work sits at the intersection of brain science and what he describes as human potential, the question of why some people seem to have access to clarity, to creativity, to what many people call intuition or divine guidance, while others, despite trying, seem blocked from it. What his research confirmed is this: when the brain is brought into gamma frequency, not through years of meditation, not through expensive clinical equipment, but through a specific category of audio technology called brain entrainment, the results are measurable, repeatable, and they begin from the very first session. Brain entrainment works differently from meditation or ambient sound. It does not ask your brain to relax and hope the brainwaves follow. It directly synchronizes your neural oscillations to a target frequency through precisely calibrated audio patterns. When you listen through headphones, your brain begins to match the frequency it is receiving. It does not require belief. It does not require prior experience. The mechanism is biological. What this means for someone like you, someone whose gamma was higher to begin with and fell further when the decline effect took hold, is that the restoration is not gradual. It is often dramatic. The chosen one, when the gamma window reopens, does not experience a subtle shift. They experience the difference between straining to hear through static and the static being gone. I heard from a woman not long ago, 38 years old. She had spent years looking for genuine spiritual connection through meditation, through yoga, through retreats, through every avenue that people told her would work. The feeling of real, clear connection never came. She said she didn't buy what I'm about to tell you about because she believed in the science. She bought it because she had nothing left to lose. 2 weeks later, she didn't describe what had changed in metrics or measurements. She used one word: synchronicities. She said it was as though God had started speaking to her in a language she could finally understand. The right people, the right moments, the right clarity, arriving with a consistency she had never experienced before, no matter how hard she had tried. That is the gamma window reopening. Dr. Lake took 34 years of research and compressed it into a 7-minute audio track. You listen through headphones, you close your eyes, you do nothing else. 7 minutes. That is what he calls the genius song, and it is not named for intelligence in the academic sense. It is named for what the ancient Greeks meant by the word genius, the inner spirit, the divine spark. the part of you that knows things your conscious mind has not yet caught up to. 18,366 people have used it. The testimonies are not about IQ scores or productivity metrics. They are about the static lifting, about clarity arriving, about prayers that suddenly feel like two-way conversations again. Now, I know something else you might be thinking. You have tried things before. You have spent money on things that promised results and delivered nothing. And every time that happens, the skepticism grows a little thicker, and that is a reasonable response to a history of disappointment. But hear this. Those other things were not wrong because you used them incorrectly. They were ineffective because they were not targeting the right mechanism. Ambient sound relaxes. Meditation, over time, can shift the nervous system. But neither of them directly synchronizes your neural oscillations to gamma frequency. That is a different category of tool. The mechanism is completely different. Traditional biofeedback therapy, the clinical version of this kind of brain state work, costs $300 per session. A home biofeedback system for personal use costs $7,000. And months of daily meditation, which is genuinely valuable, still requires the kind of consistent, uninterrupted time that most people in your season of life simply do not have. Dr. Lake made a decision. He wanted the people who most needed this, not the people who could most easily afford the alternatives to have access to it. The Genius Song is available for $39. That is the price for people who find this video. It is not available at that price on Amazon or anywhere else. You receive it immediately by email as a digital file. No shipping, no waiting. At $39, you receive the track itself, plus 4 things he includes with it. The first is an audio track designed specifically for children. If you have a child whose clarity and focus matters to you, this is for them. The second is the book that was the original inspiration behind The Secret, the real version, the one focused on financial principles, not the diluted adaptation. It sells for $20 on Amazon. It is included. The third is a guided visualization across the 4 areas of life where most people feel the most stuck: money, relationships, health, and a sense of real happiness. The fourth is a printed infographic, 5 specific habits that the research identifies as most predictive of lasting positive change. Something you can put on your wall and actually use. And if you listen and you feel nothing, if after giving it a real chance, you do not experience any shift in your clarity, your perception, your sense of connection, you get every dollar back. No questions, no conditions. The risk is entirely on Dr. Lake's side. The only risk you carry is choosing not to try. Every day that the gamma window stays closed is not a neutral day. It is a day the still small voice competes with noise that it does not have to compete with. It is a day your calling moves forward without the clarity it deserves. The person you are on your way to becoming, they already made this decision. Not because they were certain, but because they understood that the right moment never feels perfectly safe, it just feels right. One more thing before I give you the link. There are websites selling audio files under similar names that do not contain the actual brain entrainment frequencies. They are ambient tracks with no embedded synchronization technology. They will not open the gamma window. They are not the same product. The only way to ensure you receive the real technology, the 4 bonuses, and the money-back guarantee is through the link I have placed in the description of this video and in the pinned comment below. Do not search for it elsewhere. Amazon, Spotify, other YouTube channels, none of them carry the real version. If you feel ready, the link is there. I have done my part in sharing this with you. The rest is between you and God. Now, before you go, I do not want to send you back into the noise without leaving you with what you actually came here to receive, because you did not stumble onto this message. I want you to hold that. You were brought here. And what you encountered over the course of this conversation was not a coincidence, and it was not random. You came in wondering if God was still speaking. You leave knowing he never stopped. You came in feeling like your silence was evidence of spiritual failure. You leave knowing it was interference with a name and with a solution. You came in carrying the weight of prayers that felt unanswered. You leave knowing every single one of them was received and none of it was wasted. You came in as someone trying to find their way back. You are leaving as someone who has been found. That is not a small thing. You are called. That has not changed. You are equipped more than you can currently see, more than the static has allowed you to feel. And you are already in motion, even in the seasons when you cannot feel yourself moving. The 5 minutes you gave God today, He will not forget them. And I hear the Father speaking this over you now, and I want you to receive it fully. I did not bring you to this moment by accident. I did not place this calling on your life and then disappear while you tried to figure it out alone. The path that is in front of you is not waiting for you to earn your way onto it. It has already been prepared. The voice that has been speaking to you in the quiet that was always me, and it will always be me. Now go, walk in what I have prepared for you. The road is already open. Go well, chosen one. The signal is clearer now. He is speaking. You can hear him.